would like to set the stage up for the first keynote session of the day. Please give a warm welcome to our first keynote speaker, Neil Daswani, President of Daswani Enterprises, who will share his insights on the topic, Voice of Customers Answered by AI. Neil, please come.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, no? Very good. It looks like the mics are working. Wonderful. So as Jackie mentioned, my name is Neil Daswani. I am absolutely thrilled to be opening up the keynote session this morning at InterCon World 2021. I'm going to be talking about voice of the customer answered by artificial intelligence. So first of all, let me just kind of get a show of hands. How many people have heard of the term voice of the customer before today's conference, and maybe not just from the title of the talk? Good, about half the room. That is pretty interesting. And how many of you have voice of the customer programs in your companies or organizations? About half of that. Great, well, wonderful. So let me first start talking about what is the voice of the customer. The voice of the customer is a term that was first used by Abby Griffin and Jan Hauser in a MIT marketing science publication in the early 90s. They initially used the term to refer to the idea of getting customer feedback on products that companies sell and processes to gather that feedback, whether it be in-person interviews, telephone interviews, whatever it happened to be. Now, what's happened over time is that what is covered in voice of the customer programs has only grown. So, for instance, in the mid and late 90s, voice of the customer programs started incorporating comments from websites. They started incorporating online reviews. They started gathering data on people's website behaviors to understand how people were interested in finding out about products and services at companies, as well as in using, say, website services. For services that are also not just online, the concept of using things like Net Promoter Scores, where you can do telephone interviews with customers to understand, is this customer likely to promote your service further, or might they be unhappy and be a detractor? And so Net Promoter Scores measure things like that. And what's happened is that voice of the customer programs have grown to not just cover customer feedback, but have grown to encompass all aspects, all the way starting from awareness of a company, awareness of a product or a service, all the way through purchase, usage, and maintaining loyalty with customers over time. So that's what voice of the customer programs are about. And I'll talk about the future of voice of the customer and where these programs have evolved. One of the key areas that these programs have evolved in is employing more and more artificial intelligence to gather insights about customers. So I got a show of hands on how many people have heard of voice of the customer. How many people have heard of AI? I'm just kidding. Everybody's heard of AI. But that wasn't the case 25 years ago. 25 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student, I had gotten into computer science because I was interested in artificial intelligence. Now, unfortunately, at the time, there wasn't enough compute power or data to allow artificial intelligent programs to do much more than play games, whether it be checkers, chess, or whatever it happens to be. Artificial intelligence has evolved quite significantly due to a bunch of technological shifts that have taken place over the years. And to just give some examples of artificial intelligence, there's many different kinds of artificially intelligent algorithms. I'm going to comment on two. I'm going to comment on supervised learning. I'm going to comment on unsupervised learning, but I'm not going to cover natural language processing, deep learning, or many other forms of neural networks or whatnot. But let me just give two examples of supervised learning and unsupervised learning, both generally as well as how they can be used in voice of the customer programs. So let's start with supervised learning. Let's say that you have a bunch of images of cats and dogs, and you'd like a computer to be able to figure out which images are cats and which images are dogs. Well, what you can do is you can train a supervised learning program, sometimes also called a classifier, and give it a whole bunch of examples of cat images and dog images as have been labeled by humans. What the algorithm then does is looks at all kinds of characteristics of those images and builds up an internal model as to whether the image might be a cat or a dog. And once that model is trained using data that's been labeled by humans, you can then feed the algorithm previously unseen images that will be able to be classified by the algorithm as being a cat or being a dog. So that is how supervised learning works. And so if you've heard of Bayesian classifiers, if you've heard of decision trees, pretty much those are all supervised learning algorithms. Now, what does this have to do with voice of the customer? Well, what you can do in a voice of the customer program is you can look at, say, the ages and locations and other characteristics of your current customers and train a model for what makes up your current customers. And then when you have new customer prospects, you can feed those characteristics of the new customer prospects into the algorithm, and that algorithm will be able to tell you things like how likely is it that that person might become a customer of your product or your service. So that's one application of how you can apply supervised learning to a voice of the customer problem. Let me give one example of unsupervised learning. Unsupervised learning is a bit different. Unsupervised learning is a model in which you can feed an algorithm a whole bunch of images. Some of them might be of cats, some of them might be of dogs, some of them might be about a whole bunch of things that are not cats or dogs. And you can feed all these images into an algorithm. What it will do is it will break up all the images into clusters. It will perhaps come up with one cluster, another cluster, another cluster, and you can then have a human look at those clusters. Now, the idea here is that the computer may be able to come up with these clusters that have similar characteristics, but perhaps because the computer doesn't have an understanding of meaning, what you need to do is have a human look at the clusters and say, oh, that's a cluster of cats, or oh, that's a cluster of dogs. But it's really humans that still have to look at the clusters that the algorithm comes up with in order to figure out whether they're cats or dogs or what are these clusters of. And that's how unsupervised learning works. In the scope of a voice of the customer application, what you can do is you can take characteristics and data about, say, all the customers that you have, you can feed it into the unsupervised learning algorithm, the clustering algorithm, and what it can help you do is come up with different clusters of your customers, and you can assemble personas for each of those clusters. You might have one cluster that's made up of teenagers. You might have another cluster that's made up of more middle-aged folks. You might have a cluster of people that live in a particular location in the country. And that is what you can do to identify some personas that can then drive your further marketing efforts. You can then basically have your marketing efforts look for prospective customers that are similar to the personas that the clustering algorithm identified. So that's voice of the customer, that's artificial intelligence, those are some example applications. Artificial intelligence is currently used in many, many different areas in voice of the customer programs. And this slide shows an example, a whole bunch of data points, and let me just talk about a couple. I don't, of course, have the time to go through all of these. But how many of you have ever interacted with a chatbot on a website? Give me a show of hands. How many people have interacted with the chatbots? Okay. How many people have enjoyed those interactions with the chatbots? Good, I think I have 2 hands in the entire audience. And how many of you think those interactions with chatbots could be a heck of a lot better in those chatbots actually helping you with what you need to get done? How many people think it would be better? Great, wonderful. So like half the room. So this is an example where artificial intelligence is being used to power some of these chatbots, but in the field, we need to get a heck of a lot better at making those chatbots more useful to customers. They are great for reducing customer service costs, but if the customers aren't happy at the end of the day and it's really not helping them, we need to advance where we are. And I think we're still at the very beginning of AI-powered chatbots. But AI is not just used for chatbots and initial interactions to say, educate people about a service, using the website also as a tool. But when you think about the full customer journey from awareness of a potential product or service all the way to working to get your customers to be loyal, it used to be the case that companies used to have to do mass marketing. And the idea there was that it was very expensive to develop content, and it was very expensive to broadcast that out. And so the typical model was companies would do this mass marketing and try to attract customers based on what marketing assets they could come up with due to the high such costs. Now, over time, what's happened is that the cost of content creation has gone down, the cost of broadcast has gone down, and so today, one can not just do mass marketing, but you can do customized mass marketing, where the journey that any particular individual takes to learn about your service, to purchase it, and then to continue using it can be highly customized based on their individual characteristics, their age, their location, what websites they've been to, what they've liked on Facebook, all these sorts of things. And that's an example of journey personalization in the area of voice of the customer. And then, of course, on the back end, you can imagine that you can do a lot of data mining on people, how people use your products, what features are most useful, what features are least likely being used to help you prioritize all kinds of things ranging from product development to customer identification and customer loyalty building. So that's how AI is being currently used in voice of the customer applications. Now, there's a couple key technological shifts that have been taking place which will guide how AI gets used in the future. So I've talked about just 3 or 4 shifts on this slide. The first thing that I will mention is cloud computing technology. So the cloud is changing everything. Everyone's migrating to the cloud. But what does this really mean for voice of the customer and AI? Well, what's happened is that for the first time in history, it's become much more cost efficient to get compute resources and data storage resources at the major cloud providers like the Googles and the Amazons of the world. But one of the super interesting things that have happened is that for years, the Googles and the Amazons of the world have been using artificial intelligence to help their customers. So for instance, when you go to Google, there's a lot of AI that's running on the back end of the site to try to figure out which ads should they serve you that you're going to be most likely to click on based on a whole bunch of machine learning models. And at Amazon, when you hit Amazon's page based on what you've bought in the past and what other websites you visit and all kinds of other things, the site will serve up some prospective products for you that you might be most likely to buy. So Google and Amazon have been using AI on the back end for years. Perhaps they don't have a specific voice of the customer program, but they've been doing it. Now, one of the super interesting things that they've done is they've taken all of the AI algorithms, all the models, maybe not all, but a lot of them, and they have made them available for other companies to use. So if you look at Amazon, they have a program called Amazon Connect, which will identify keywords and phrases in voice conversations. They have a service called Amazon Transcribe, which will take all the audio and transcribe it into words for you using all kinds of voice and natural language processing. There's also an API or an application programming interface, a service that Amazon makes available called Amazon Comprehend. And what it'll do is it will listen to the audio and understand the customer's sentiment. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they upset? And you can use that data. And you can use these algorithms that Amazon gives you in addition to the compute and the data storage on the cloud in order to support your voice of the customer program. So that's one big technological shift. All of that stuff has become available in the past few years, whereas it hadn't previously. In addition, we all have, how many people have smartphones in the room? Okay. Is there anybody that doesn't have a smartphone that's brave enough to admit it and raise their hand? No one, not one. Okay. If we look at these smartphones that we have today, they have tons of sensors and data gathering built into it. So there's cameras, there's microphones, there's GPS, your location can be tracked wherever you go, every app that you use, every click that could be recorded, how long you keep apps open, what times you use them. There's just tons and tons of data that's now available so that when you're interacting with an app, when you're making a call out to the customer service number, when you happen to visit a retail location, that location can be recorded. The amount of data that's available from all of these apps and devices is now getting harnessed by these voice of customer programs. And 10, 15 years ago, the prevalence of all that technology didn't exist. So we're at an interesting time in the point of history where all that data can be gathered and used to understand customers and their insights. You can now, on the big data front and predictive analytic front, you can analyze terabytes, petabytes of data at a scale that typically only the largest companies could, and now that's all being offered to many other companies. Combine that together with the fact that there's been a power shift with regards to consumers. There's been a power shift in the sense that it used to be the case that most consumers had to buy whatever the large companies had available. But now that a lot of products are digital and can be mass customized, companies can cater in a much more customized way to individuals. In addition, many millennials and people that are online create tons of content on social media and give off tons of signals about themselves that can also be harnessed. So there are some pretty significant major technological shifts that are affecting the future of voice of the customer and AI. And if I go to the next slide here, I'll mention that there's certainly a lot of benefits for both companies as well as consumers. On the company front, they may be able to provide more streamlined and natural customer journeys. It may seem as if you're just going about your casual interactions both online and offline, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work that's taking place and it's being done by algorithms to figure out what product should I make this person aware of based on what websites they visited, what they've liked on Facebook, and a whole bunch of other things. Companies are now able to put together unified customer views of what their prospective customers and customers are doing through a whole bunch of different channels, whether it's calling into the customer service number, being on apps, being on websites, et cetera. And they can develop much deeper customer experience priorities and profiles. For consumers, the hope is that if companies can understand us well, they can help get us the things that we actually need more. And so due to that, there's all kinds of new opportunities for revenue through upselling and cross-selling the products that people need based on their likes and desires. Now, I'll tell you that there's also another side to this picture. There could be a lot of goodness for corporations, there could be a lot of goodness for consumers, but it might feel a little creepy as to how much data is being gathered and what can be done with that data. In fact, for those of you that have known me or heard of me, you know that I'm a cybersecurity expert by background. I recently published this book, Big Breaches, Cybersecurity Lessons for Everyone, this past March, just finished the book tour. But there's been a lot of data that's been lost by corporations. There's been over 9,000 data breaches over the past 15 years. And there is no sign that this is going to get any better right away. And so the question is, can AI, powering voice of the customer programs, help with this problem? Almost 80% of customer service experience professionals believe that AI can make interaction with customers more secure. We've all heard of cases where many popular services have customer service agents, and they happen to be curious, and so they looked up the records for some celebrity or politician or whatever it happened to be. Perhaps they got themselves fired, but basically, when you have data about customers like that, and customer service agents, humans have access to it, there's all kinds of bad things that can happen between data leaks as well as data being stolen. Now, on the other hand, if the AI gets good enough, and most interactions can happen with the AI chatbots or with a AI-powered agent with a voice over the phone, maybe it could be possible that only algorithms see data about you. Now, on one hand, some people might feel more comfortable if there's another human on the other line, and that can help them with their problems, but then you're exposing your data about yourself to that human, your credit card number, social security number, whatever it happens to be. On the other hand, if it's only an algorithm that's getting access to that data, then perhaps such data may not be able to get leaked. In my Big Breaches book, I talk about the 6 technical root causes of breaches. One of them is inadvertent employee mistakes that can lead to some of these data leaks. So there is a possibility to get more privacy and more security. But there's going to be a lot of work that we have to do because of the fact that AI, just like many other kinds of algorithms, can be duped and deceived. Malicious input has caused all kinds of problems for websites. People can break into websites by supplying malicious input, and AI algorithms are no different. There's, in fact, a field that's arisen called adversarial AI, where you make the assumption that the attacker can train the data that's used to train the AI models. There's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong with AI algorithms. In fact, there's an institute called the Berryville Institute of Machine Learning, and they are focused on cataloging all the different things that can go wrong when AI is used. And so you have to defend yourself against these kinds of things. Our cars, my Tesla uses AI, and so I don't want it to be the case that somebody could stick a sticker on a speed limit sign and get my car to think that it should speed up instead of slow down. There's a lot of challenges with AI, but there's a lot of opportunity as well. It used to be the case back in 2018 that approximately 50% of people did not trust AI, but the very following year, only 36% of consumers said that they didn't trust AI. So the trust in AI may go up over time as it starts doing stuff that's more useful. So there's a lot of opportunity here. Let me talk about some interesting examples of what companies are doing with AI. So thus far, I've been talking about AI as a technology used by enterprises and companies to assemble insights of the voice of the customer. But let me ask you this. How many of you have ever been charged a late fee, a penalty, or some interest by a bank or a financial institution that you don't believe you should have been charged? Give me a show of hands. Good, like half the room. And it's kind of frustrating that on one hand, there are a whole bunch of AI algorithms working for companies, but it might be nice to have algorithms working for all of us too. And so what one company has done, if we could get the slide back up, there's a company by the name of Cushion, which has developed, once you sign up with Cushion, it uses a whole bunch of AI on your behalf to interact and chat with the chatbots at the financial institutions to help you get your fees and your penalties and your interest charges to get that money back. To date, Cushion has gotten over $10 million of refunds for thousands of customers in aggregate. And it's an example of a service where my voice as a customer and a consumer can be AI-powered as well. And even though I don't have the financial resources and the AI resources that many, many large companies do, it gives me a fighting chance. So check out Cushion.ai. They use AI in a bunch of different ways. One thing that they do is they use natural language processing to simply understand all the messages going back and forth between the chatbots. They use deep machine learning models to identify refund amounts. They use machine learning and regression to determine what their strategy, what the negotiation strategy should be, and what might be the expected refund based on which negotiation strategy the algorithm is considering. So that's an example of how AI is being used to help consumers. Another example is Tether. Tether has raised $30 million to date, and they can do a whole bunch of the things that one might expect to understand the context of customer calls, to help provide insights. But from a privacy and security perspective, one cool thing that Tether does is that when you call into a service and it says you're being recorded for quality and training purposes, blah, 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 and you then have to provide a customer service agent with your customer number or your social security number or your credit card number, what Tether is doing in the background is it is deleting those numbers out of the conversation. It is using AI to identify those parts of the conversation, and it deletes it both from the audio logs as well as from the transcripts. So that's an interesting way that that Tether's using AI to help protect the voice of the customer quite literally. And then a final example is Wonderflow. Wonderflow gathers tons of data off the web and understands whether customer feedback that's being provided is positive, negative, or neutral. One of the other things that Wonderflow does is it will identify when it might be the case that customers are not just talking about your company and your products and services, but are talking about your competitors and doing comparisons. So that's another example where they're using AI and natural language processing and categorization to do that. So let me start summing up by chatting about where the field is going. There's three different areas. First, AI is helping increase predictive value of customer insights. One of those predictive value examples is one where you might have a bunch of customers that are using your product, and some customers might be happy and will continue to use the product. Some customers may not be happy with the service. They might not be using certain features, and they may churn out. And one of the things that AI can do is help provide early indicators of potential outcomes, both good outcomes as well as bad outcomes. So it's always the case when customers are happy with the service and they're going to buy more or upgrade their plan. And when that happens, great, that could just be a good surprise. But you could have a case where the usage of a particular product is going down. One feature or the other feature or the other feature is getting used less. And one of the things AI can do is identify when it might be the case that a customer is likely to start churning out and leaving the product or service. And you can train a bunch of algorithms to predict when that's about to happen, and then take actions like ask the user, hey, are you having trouble using this particular feature? Maybe we can help you. You can engage them directly. And once you do help some customers, you can get to a point where you can automate the responses to the problems that customers are having. So increasing the predictive value is one such example. Another example is simply the adoption of voice of the customer programs altogether. So less than half of companies have voice of the customer programs. And I suspect that over time, more organizations will adopt these kinds of programs, and more of them will also leverage more AI in those programs to make them more effective. In fact, only a third of companies are getting data across all the different channels, and I think the adoption of these programs will grow. Finally, I'll mention that such programs also using AI are able to put together a much more sophisticated view of the customer than previously possible. They can be much more context aware, given visibility into all the communications, and these profiles for these customers can also be dynamic instead of static. Basically, as you recruit a customer and they start using your product for a couple years, their profile might change. Initially, they might have been a teenager. They might only have social media assets, but over time, they might get credit cards. They might get bank accounts. You'll understand more about their resources, and the initial persona may change. And what you can do is leverage AI to do such kind of analyses over time to identify the persona journey of your customers as they use your products over time. So those are some interesting trends that we'll see going forward. Overall, the area of voice of the customer has been around for a good 30 years, and we've seen a lot of evolution, ranging from first just focusing on getting customer feedback from people that are using your products, to then understanding the customer journey end-to-end, starting with awareness all the way to loyalty. And we're now at a point where we have, to an extent, AI fighting AI, some of that AI working on behalf of the consumers, some AI working on behalf of enterprises and corporations. Gartner has found that 80% of companies compete on the customer experience that they provide their customers. And in that context, AI can be a super useful tool. I expect that what will happen is that the more that companies leverage AI to understand their customers better, the more revenue that they'll be able to make. And I think that for consumers, hopefully we can help them get a lot more efficient in getting the products that they actually need and want, and providing interactions in a more private and secure way than was previously possible in a mass customized fashion. So I hope that you've enjoyed this quick journey here through the voice of the customer and how it's getting more and more so powered by AI. My name is Neil Daswani. Thank you for your time and attention. And I'm happy to take a question or two if we have time. I have one in the back. In fact, good, I'll even raffle off a copy of my Big Breaches book. Go ahead, what's your question? I'm sorry, what's the question? Okay, so the question is, when a lot of companies aggregate data, they gather data on a lot of customers. Got it, and I was just repeating the question so everyone could hear it, given that you don't have a microphone. So there's some AI companies that gather data in aggregate, and the issue is that when you see the actual customer behavior, it may differ. And that is indeed right, that can exactly happen. Basically, the more data that you have about the customers, if you can employ more AI to analyze segments of the customers, cluster them up, then you may be able to understand them better so that you don't have to make decisions in the aggregate. But I think that the trend has got to be more mass customized and leveraging more data on individuals so that we can get to a point where we can make super customized recommendations. So thank you for the question. Good, I think we don't have time for any other questions, but thank you once again. Hope you enjoyed the talk and look forward to seeing you later at the conference. I hope we begin a dialogue about how to iterate and evolve voice of the customer and AI forward. Thank you.